Okay, it's been a full day. Now I'm gonna basically get into rambling on about the second half of why the fucking Last Jedi just doesn't work. I want to basically add a few more notes that I basically kind of didn't get around the chance to talking about in the last one because these rambly rants sometimes things are gonna get left behind. Well, basically take, for example, the idea of, the chase through space. You're being slowly chased through space, and the idea is that, basically speaking, when the other ships run out of fuel, like the medical frigate and the support cruisers that are on the other side of, the main ship, when they run out of fuel and they just stop working, somehow they basically begin, slowing down and drifting and falling behind the pace of, the main ship. And I'm just left thinking, Ryan, you do realize that this takes place in space, don't you? They're not in an atmosphere. They literally have no wind resistance that would slow them down. If anything, they should be keeping their momentum. And I'm just left thinking that, they... if anything, that kind of makes this whole space chase irrelevant. The First Order basically is, supposedly doing this out of sadistic means because Hux wants to kill them in the most sadistic way possible. Effectively speaking, you're not going to keep up with that. You're not going to suddenly outpace them once they run out of fuel because they still have their momentum, which should be carrying them forward until they hit an atmosphere, at which point it won't matter anyway because then they'll crash. Or you might as well just basically let their ship run out of power, let their life support systems run out, and let them basically either starve or suffocate to death on the ship. So basically speaking, that's one of the huge things that doesn't really make any sense about the physics of this movie. And also, when Leia gets sucked out of the ship, the main ship is basically supposed to be keeping a pace just fast enough to stay ahead of the First Order ships. So basically, you get sucked out of the ship. Quite frankly, that should basically keep her momentum basically moving as far away from the ship as possible. And meanwhile, the ship itself is also moving away from the location where she got blown out of, so how the heck did she not get left behind? How could she just so easily put herself back onto the ship regardless? So many fucking stupid things about these movies. Okay, so when we last left off, we talked about why the Holdo maneuver is stupid. And what's even more laughable is the idea that apparently in the Star Wars galaxy, there were supposed to be hyperspace missiles as well. I'm sorry, but anything of any size going the speed of light, be it a missile that's designed to explode or an X-Wing fighter that's not designed to explode, it hits something literally going at the speed of light, it's going to cut through whatever opposition it has. It'll be completely disintegrated, mind you, but it's gonna punch a hole in it. Nothing can withstand something traveling the speed of light. It's physically impossible. So, I mean, an actual solid object. Light particles itself that travel the speed of light, they're effectively harmless, but concentrated into a beam, that'd be something. Okay, so, now, talking about the Holdo maneuver, it's just one of those things that's just so convenient because it's literally just it's one of those narrative things that's kind of like a Deus Ex Machina. It basically comes out of nowhere to basically solve an unsolvable problem. And the movie didn't earn this at all because literally speaking, if Holdo didn't do this, then then Finn and Rose, and probably Rey, they'd all end up dead at this point. So basically speaking, we'll get to Rey when we get to her and Luke. the main rebel ship basically hyperdrives, it cuts through half of the supremacy, and it wipes out basically the 10 First Order Star Destroyers that are following behind. And a lot of people are trying to defend that, oh, nobody is actually going to basically pull off a suicide mission like this, and the cost of, like, sacrificing a huge ship like that isn't going to be worth it. It's like, you use one hyperdrive jump on a bulk cruiser that takes out a huge friggin' super Star Destroyer level of the Supremacy ship, as well as 10 Star Destroyers behind it, you would think that that basically is more or less a justification in taking the loss, because you lose one ship, you take out 11 other ships. So that's just basically a thing. Okay, so the way that she cuts through the Supremacy is basically to cause enough damage to where Rose and Finn escape getting executed by the fucking laser axe executioner Star Destroyers. Quite frankly, I would have preferred them to bring out flamethrowers. And basically, at this point, you realize that, like the main hangar is on fire and everything, and basically speaking, like Finn and Rose, they have basically been, like, thrown about, but suddenly, somehow or another, Phasma and her stormtroopers have completely disappeared from the scene, just so that they can make a dramatic entrance through the fire, and it's like, how did they end up all the way over there? So Finn and Rose, they're outnumbered by all these, like, stormtroopers and whatnot. They don't have any weapons. So suddenly, out of nowhere, an ATST begins firing on the stormtroopers, giving cover fire for Rose and Finn, and you realize that the movie basically reveals that it's actually BB-8 that's driving it, and I'm just left wondering, like, how did BB-8 get up there? I mean, I'm pretty sure he would have to actually climb up, like, some kind of ladder in order to get into the ATST. If there's a scaffolding, I can believe that, but I think that BB-8 might be a little too big to actually fit into the controls of this thing, and so... But whatever, BB-8 is a friggin' Deus Ex Machina that comes in to save the day, and Finn manages to get his hands on on that energy baton that basically was used by TR-8R from the previous movie, and Phasma decides to completely abandon the rifle that she had earlier in this scene, and instead decides to engage Finn with this metallic spear staff that she suddenly has. And so they have their knockdown, drag-out fight, and it's completely meaningless because, like, Phasma is such a nothing burger of a character. And what I find just so laughable is that when Phasma was introduced in The Force Awakens, they treated her like she was such a big deal. Like, the woman that plays Brienne of Tarth, I really like her in Game of Thrones, but she just really did not know, like, what this character actually was. She was expecting this character to actually be something relevant, but I don't get how she thought that when she was on set with this character performing as her. I mean, is there a cut of The Force Awakens that, like, includes, like, more than an hour of unused footage that has Captain Phasma actually be a legitimate character that Brienne of Tarth didn't know was being cut from the movie? So, what I find even more insulting is the idea that there were press interviews, like building up how great Captain Phasma was going to be, because she was, and I quote, the first on-screen female antagonist in Star Wars. And I'm left thinking, honey, you don't look like Asajj Ventress. You don't look like Aura Singh. You don't look like Mother Talzin. Hell, You don't even look like Zam, the assassin that was teamed up with Jango Fett in Attack of the Clones. Like the other three, that I just mentioned, they were all basically like more prominently featured in the Clone Wars, but Zam was actually in one of the numbered movies. She was actually in one of these numbered movies as an antagonist. And I gotta admit that Zam actually has more character than Captain Phasma. Like, basically speaking, she's an assassin that's working with a bounty hunter, and you can tell that she basically, like, she only really treats killing other people as if it's just a job. It's like, I'm just trying to make a living here. So, the fact that she basically, like, recognizes that there is a moral code, but she just doesn't follow it, showcases that she has more personality than Phasma, who's basically just she's basically walking brainwashed material. Oh, and how could I not bring this up? Basically speaking, before, like, Finn and Phasma have their melee duel, Finn picks up a laser rifle. No, wait, Rose. She picks up a pistol and tries to shoot Phasma, only for the blaster bolt to completely deflect off of her shiny chrome-plated armor. Yeah, you remember basically, like, how sarcastic I was when I did Farce Awakens, talking about how she was being held at gunpoint, and how stupid it would be if it turns out that her armor was completely impenetrable to laser fire? So, basically speaking, like, yeah, turns out that it completely is. Like, lasers friggin' bounce off of her armor like it's nothing. And why? Why does she have this really special, highly important armor? Well, apparently, it was salvaged from the exterior plating of Emperor Palpatine's personal yacht. Yep. Because a yacht totally needs to be completely destruction-proof. Well, maybe if you're like an important official that basically like has a lot of enemies with a huge target on his head, maybe that might make sense. But the question comes up as to why is she the only one who has this special armor? Well, it's very simple, you see. You see, there was only enough material salvaged from the yacht to make this one set of armor. A yacht has only enough of this one specific plating material to make armor to cover a 6-foot-tall woman's body. 6.5 at most. That's insane. If there's one thing that I know about Palpatine, he's not known for his subtlety. Everything about him is go big, be extravagant, or go away. So you're telling me that his own personal yacht that he takes on, that he cruises the galaxy in his off-season, is somehow going to be small enough to where only enough of this plating is going to make enough armor for one person? Nope. Nope, nope, nope. It does not work like that. You can't force me to believe it, especially because that whole excuse is how there's obviously only so much salvage from the yacht to make one set of armor for her. That's just, as Mahler put it, people writing the script for Rian Johnson. So, anyways, they have their knockdown, drag-out fight, and somehow or another, Finn has become more competent as a melee fighter than he was in the first movie, where he was only making wild swings at Kylo Ren. Yeah, it's amazing what being in a coma can actually do for you. So, he basically manages to slice across her helmet, I think, after a moment where she was either distracted with Rose, or maybe everyone thought that he died or something. I don't know, it feels cheap either way. So, he slashes across her helmet, and he breaks through her visor, and, oh my god, we see that she's a human being underneath. And she basically calls him traitorous scum, at which point he says rebel scum. Now, this is a point that I really find so much contention with in this movie, because It's dumb. It's so fucking dumb. It's so obvious that Ruin Johnson is so bitter about the fact that he wasn't the first person to make the first movie in this fucking trilogy that he literally decides to reset J.J. Abrams' own reset to where he basically, like, once again returns Star Wars to the state it was in 40 years ago. Literally speaking, the first movie, the first Star Wars movie with Rebels versus the evil Empire, that's what Johnson has reduced us to. And effectively speaking, it's so superficial because it's just words. Because Resistance and First Order, Rebels and Empire, there was no fucking difference to begin with. Everyone who watched these movies knew that, so now the movie basically acknowledging that, yeah, this is the case, it's so fucking stupid. It's just fucking dumb. Basically speaking, at this point throughout the movie, they basically, like, just drop the labels of, like, the Resistance, and now they just call them the Rebels. And I guess it's basically because, like, the First Order reigns, even though that doesn't make any sense because the entire galaxy should be rallying against them, literally calling for them to be lynched. Like, basically speaking, you can't really take over like this. Like, basically they think that they're using fear and oppression to basically, like, bring on this dictatorship, this fascist regime, but that's not gonna work. The reason why Palpatine's fascist regime worked is because he had a scapegoat. Literally, the entire point of of controlling both sides of the war and making sure that the Separatists did horrible, atrocious things in the galaxy was literally to showcase that, basically speaking, like, was literally to showcase that the galaxy that remained part of the Republic had something to be afraid of, something to rally behind. Effectively, like, basically speaking, Palpatine used the concept of fear of the Separatists to maintain control of the Republic and thus create the Empire, because everybody was so paranoid and wanted security. The First Order coming in and just blowing shit up and say, submit or die, that's not gonna fucking work. Yeah, some people are going to be afraid going up against overwhelming odds, but you're not going to be able to maintain this power forever. You're just basically intimidating them right now. So, now, basically speaking, like, but all this is just semantics, and it just shows how shameless the people making this movie really are, and just how salty and bitter Ruin Johnson is, because I'm just as good as J.J. Abrams. Meanwhile, J.J. Abrams is going, I'm just as good as Steven Spielberg. Pathetic. Anyways, so basically, Rose, Finn, and BB-8, they escape from the Supremacy and they fly down to meet the rebels that are escaping to Crate. Now, I just basically want to talk about the rebels that are escaping to Crate, because I'm pretty sure that a lot of people are saying that, like, the ships that were ferrying people to safety down on Crate were basically being cloaked, so they, of course, wouldn't be detected by the First Order during the escape. Their entire plan was to sail past a nearby planet that basically the First Order should have information on, that there was in fact a rebel base left over from the original Galactic Civil War on that planet, and they would hope to pile into a whole bunch of ships, even though they're being cloaked, to fly down to that planet and just hide out while the First Order continues to chase their main cruiser. Okay, like I said, one, there are such things as life form scanners in this movie. If the First Order scans the main ship and discovers that there's only one life form left aboard the entire ship, and it's the person that's piloting the damn thing, they're gonna realize something is up. Secondly, the First Order would be incredibly stupid to not even consider the fact that they're passing by a planet that has a known rebel base on it, that they wouldn't try to escape down there unnoticed. They would, in fact, be anticipating that. And secondly, and thirdly, most of all, the movie literally goes out of its way to showcase that the First Order does, in fact, have, quote, decloaking scans, so they should have been doing that from the very beginning. Effectively speaking, there's no way this plan would have worked. The First Order would literally have to be complete morons for this plan to have worked. And I'm sorry, but no amount of incompetence shown from General Hux or Captain Phasma is going to convince me that everyone in the First Order is as incompetent as the movie wants us to believe. I think that Ruin Johnson wanted to showcase just how pointless the B plot with the chase through space, trying to get away from the First Order, and the whole subplot with Canto Bight really was, because he's literally gone on record stating that the heart and soul of this movie is Rey's interactions with Luke Skywalker. Except, if that's the heart and soul of this movie, then this movie is both heartless and soulless, because Rian Johnson thinks that what he has made in this movie is substance. It isn't. Because, basically speaking, like, what he thinks is substance in this movie, it doesn't work. It's literally a gigantic continuity error. It's a plot hole, because Luke Skywalker is not Luke Skywalker in this movie. Now, basically speaking, I mentioned earlier that Luke basically just threw away his father's lightsaber, an object that meant so much to him when he was growing up, when he was a young man, who was the thing that was literally given to him as a gift from his friend and mentor, Obi-Wan Kenobi, which has serious sentimental value to him. And he basically just closed himself off in a hut, and trying to completely ignore Rey until Chewie knocks down his door, at which point he reveals that he didn't even know that Han Solo is dead. And the movie doesn't even show him mourning for the loss of his best friend and his brother-in-law, so friggin' this isn't Luke Skywalker. So Rey tries to convince Luke to come back and lead the resistance against the First Order, and Luke literally says, "Do you think I came to the most unfindable place in the entire galaxy for no reason? I came here to die." And it's just like, what? So, you came all the way out here to the planet of the first Jedi Temple, and you left a map behind so that people could find you, just so that you could die? What for? Why would you even bother leaving the map behind if you didn't want people to find you? Did Max von Sydow know the real reason why you went to that planet? Because I'm pretty sure that this is a massive plot hole in regards to The Force Awakens. This cannot be what J.J. Abrams had planned for Luke to be doing out there on that island. Guys, I'm going to get into something personal here that I didn't want to talk about. I didn't think that I was going to talk about this in this video, but it stuck with me so much that I literally cannot ignore it. Okay, so anyone who knows me knows that my father and I haven't lived together since roughly 2014 after my mom died, and I stuck around with him in his house to basically, help keep him on his feet. I stayed with him for about roughly, I'd say, 4 or 5 months after that, in order to basically, before we basically went our separate ways. He decided to move back down to Mexico after that, and he's been living in Mexico City for basically the last 5 years, with the occasional brief stay with at his parents' place, who live in Dallas, Texas. So, my dad lives in Mexico City, but I've seen him, I think maybe once a year, for the last few years or so, ever since my sister started to get married, and this year, he flew out over here to visit us for Christmas and to see his granddaughter. That's a story in and of itself. So basically, for the last week or so, ever since December 16th, I've basically been hanging out with my dad, having fun with him. And so, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about was, the new Star Wars movies, because my dad was an OG fan of the original trilogy. He saw the first Star Wars movie when he was 11 years old. No, what? 11? No. I don't know if that actually makes sense, because he claims that he saw Empire when he was 14, but based on, the age, that can't possibly be true. So, I don't know. My dad's getting up in years. Based on, the year he was born, he probably didn't see it when he was 11. The point is, my dad saw these movies in theaters when they were brand new, when he was very young. He has a great appreciation for Star Wars. He even likes the prequel trilogies. When I started talking to him about these new movies, he literally said, I couldn't get through the Solo movie without falling asleep because it's so boring. I literally cannot stay awake throughout the entirety of that movie. And I literally thought that was an indication that, yeah, my dad clearly doesn't like the new Disney Star Wars movies because they're terrible. He even started talking about how Laura Dern did not age well, and how that movie that he saw her in, the new Star Wars movie, definitely did not do anything good for her. She was, terrible in that movie. And so I thought that, that was an indication that Dad really hated The Last Jedi as well. And yet Dad still wanted to see The Rise of Skywalker. We'll talk about that when that movie comes along. So, basically speaking, what stuck with me the most is the fact that it's something that I wanted to talk with my dad about the entire time he was visiting down here, but the situation never came up because he either didn't ask or the conversation we had never panned out that way. We would start conversations, but we would never effectively finish them, because we would move on to a different topic or we'd run out of time. Basically speaking, I drove my dad to the airport on Christmas Day, hoping that he would be able to get a flight back home, or wherever he is going for the rest of his vacation. So, I drove him the 40 minutes to the airport to drop him off at International, and during that time, I finally flat out asked him if he liked The Last Jedi, at which point he said that he did, and I'm just left thinking, why? Why did you like The Last Jedi? And he starts going off on, like, talking about the Star Wars movies. He talked about the prequel movies more than he did the actual Last Jedi, to the point where I had to stop him and say, what does this have to do with the Last Jedi? You do know what movie we're talking about, right? You're talking about episodes 1, 2, and 3. I'm trying to talk about episode 8. Do you understand? And so it became clear to me that my dad, he probably has not watched The Last Jedi since the movie was, like, new or whatever, because his memory of The Last Jedi is just shoddy. He does not understand, like, what the movie actually did and why it is garnering such a negative emotional reaction from me, and I tried to literally explain it to him, that the movie literally disrespects Luke Skywalker's legacy. It robbed him of his actual destiny that he was meant to perform. And I'm literally going through explaining to Dad that the Luke Skywalker that we know from episodes 4, 5, and 6 had a definitive character arc, that we saw him as a young and impulsive young man to a hot-headed Jedi warrior who wanted desperately to save his friends, until he finally became the matured and calm-minded Jedi hero that we saw in Return of the Jedi, who was willing to make the right decision, even if it meant complete self-sacrifice. He wasn't going to fall to the dark side, and worst of all, the fact that his father was literally one of the worst men in the entire galaxy, who caused so much pain and suffering for 20 years, and yet Luke still saw goodness in him and was willing to try to redeem him, even at the cost of his own life. That's how far he was willing to go in his belief that there was still good in Darth Vader, in Anakin Skywalker. So, Luke, I explained to my father that in the expanded universe that had been destroyed and removed and basically relegated to legends thanks to Disney's new canon, Luke went on to establish a new Jedi Order that had addressed the inadequacies of the previous Jedi Order, the Grey Order. This order basically talked about how they didn't practice the dark side, but they didn't deny that people had darkness within them, because basically speaking, like, darkness pretty much, like, is a part of nature. Everybody is going to have moments where they're going to slip up, where they're going to succumb to their emotion. And most importantly, unlike the previous Jedi Order that basically taught people to suppress and ignore their emotions for the sake of clarity, calm, and peacefulness, and broke off attachments, Luke taught his Jedi followers to actually deal with their emotions, to actually function as reasonable human beings, not just selfless monks that carry lightsabers around. Basically speaking, like, he taught them to be actually fully realized human beings, to not basically lose themselves to the commitment of the Jedi Order. If they couldn't basically, like, stick it out with it, that was fine. They were perfectly able to leave the Order whenever they wanted to. So, effectively speaking, like, he didn't basically create an atmosphere of self-denial. Someone had to choose whether or not they wanted to go forward with Jedi training, and they were free to basically, like, pursue whatever life they wanted to live, regardless. So, the point of the matter is that Luke, as a Jedi Master in the Legends material, is calm, collected. He's everything that we would have imagined that a fully realized Grand Jedi Master Luke Skywalker to be. Hell, literally speaking, in one of the Legends material, someone basically describes Grand Jedi Master Luke Skywalker wielding a lightsaber and describe his technique as he moves his lightsaber so quickly, one is fooled into believing he is wielding 10 lightsabers at once. That's how powerful Luke is, and how powerful he's meant to be, how competent he's meant to be as a Jedi Master. So, basically speaking, I tried explaining this to my father, And you know what my father literally said to me in return? Basically speaking, the Luke Skywalker that we see in the Last Jedi is perfectly consistent with the Luke that has always been there. That Luke is impulsive, he does things rashly, that he makes hasty decisions, that he basically always whines and complains, and he believes that Luke would go off to some planet to basically brood and complain all the friggin' time. And I literally just listened to my father say that, and I was just completely blanked on words, because my father effectively watched these movies, but he clearly didn't understand them. I have to admit, there's a sad point in your life where you have to realize that you're a lot smarter than your dad when it comes to situations that you both liked, when it comes to movies that you both enjoyed. But the hardest part of realizing that I'm smarter than my dad in this situation comes entirely from the fact that my dad just isn't thinking about these situations. I literally explained to him that's not how character arcs work. You can't go backwards on a character arc, because that's literally just backtreading on a character's development. And he literally said, "I don't understand how character arcs work." And it's like, that's plainly obvious. I don't understand all this talk about character arcs. I literally told him a character arc works from getting a character from point A to point B. If you have a character go from point A to point B, only to have them go back to point A again, that's not a character arc, that's a character degeneration. Worse, it's a character assassination. Because it's like you're only pigeonholing this one character to being what they are from their original starting point, instead of letting them grow and mature into being what they were supposed to be, what their entire life was leaning towards. I literally was flat out going to throw it in my dad's face that, "Dad, you're not the same person that you were 5 years ago. You're not the same person that you were 10 years ago. You're not the same person that you were 20 years ago. Because life progresses. Life changes people through experience. Effectively speaking, if you think that you're the same person you were when you're a teenager, you're sadly mistaken. Because, hell, basically speaking, not only am I not the same person that I was when I was a teenager, I literally hope that I'm not the same person that I was when I was a teenager. Effectively speaking, my dad doesn't understand character arcs and doesn't understand character progression, and he only ever sees Luke fucking Skywalker as the same whiny teenage boy from Tatooine from the first movie. It's almost like Dad didn't even doesn't even recognize the plot progression of Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. He only ever just sees Luke as one thing, and that is bullshit. Luke was impulsive. He was impatient. He did make rash decisions. But you know what? The Return of the Jedi changed all of that. Luke was making a rash decision, but he was doing it for a good cause, but he was willing to risk everything on a hunch. He was willing to believe in the goodness of Anakin Skywalker still buried under the surface within Darth Vader. He paid the consequences for it when he turned out to be wrong, but because he persevered and would not fall to the dark side, he managed to prove that he was right. And from that experience, Luke Skywalker is forever changed. He now knows the importance of being patient, of being understanding. He is now a fully trained Jedi Knight. Not just a Jedi Knight, but a Jedi Master. A true Jedi he has become. So you would think that 30 years of experience after that would only make things better, would only improve upon him, right? But nope. He doesn't actually get any better. He only ever gets worse. And that's the worst part about what my dad told me, because, literally speaking, by the time the conversation got to this point where Dad flat out admits that he doesn't understand how character arcs work, despite the fact that I literally just explained to him how a character arc actually friggin' works, the conversation literally basically ends as we're pulling into the terminal at the airport with him saying, "Look, I'm just glad that these movies got made. My father is under the mistaken impression that the entire Star Wars saga is actually based off of a series of books that George Lucas had written. He had wanted episodes 7, 8, and 9 to be made for the longest time, because he thought that George Lucas had actually written a 7, 8, and 9. Like I said earlier in this Rambly Rant series, my father didn't even know that Disney had taken over Lucasfilm until I told him this weekend. My father basically claims that his own father is basically insufferable thanks to his, delirium, and he basically, tells us to be on the lookout for whenever he starts exhibiting those signs of delirium. It scares me to consider that my father is basically getting to that point already. My father does not realize that episodes 7, 8, and 9 are not George Lucas's vision. George Lucas had nothing to do with these movies. Regardless of what the media is trying to tell you about George Lucas's involvement with episode 9, it was all a lie. And now, Kathleen Kennedy is using that lie specifically with what I predicted she would use that lie for. So, my dad is just one of those loyal fans that doesn't realize how insulted that they should be. That Lucasfilm has literally gone out of their way to insult him and people like him. He's just happy that these movies got made, because finally he got to see the movies that he believes were planned from the very beginning. So, that's my personal take on all of this, and just the flat out explaining why Luke is not Luke in this situation, because Luke would not do this. Luke had changed. His character had progressed. The fact that that there are people out there who actually believe that this Luke is perfectly consistent in his character development literally don't know how character arcs work. You can't go back, because if your character goes back, that means that they are poorly written. So, let's talk about the movie. So, basically speaking, we fucking have these really friggin' cringy moments with Chewbacca. You remember when Chewbacca was actually a character that was involved with the plot of these movies, but now he's basically just pushed into the background character as comic relief, just like R2 and 3PO? I mean, at least R2 and 3PO were mostly comic relief to begin with, even though they both served purposes. But Chewie in this movie is literally just there to make jokes with the movie's new marketing ploy, the Porgs, and basically to be Rey's chauffeur. There's this really stupid scene where basically, Chewie has just killed a couple of porgs and is roasting them over the fire and is preparing to eat them, and the porgs show up and start watching him trying to eat, one of their one of their own, and they basically like chitter at him and whatnot. He growls at them and like rebuffs them, gets them to scatter. He turns away and like tries to eat his dinner, at which point there's one porg sitting there that's like looking at him all sad, like, how could you do such a thing? And I'm just left thinking, movie, you're not going to convince anyone watching this movie to stop eating meat. I know that it's a hill that all you radical leftist progressives want to die on because apparently the meat industry is killing the planet, but the simple fact is, the alternative that you guys believe is healthy actually isn't healthy at all, and people end up going back on said alternative because they literally start dying if they don't go back on it. Effectively speaking, it comes off as just this message about, oh, don't kill animals because they're don't kill animals to eat them because they're cute and whatnot. And I'm just left thinking, Chewie is basically a bear, and he basically comes from a carnivorous species. He kind of has to eat. He kind of has to eat meat. Well, Chewie basically doesn't have an alternative in this situation. They want to pretend like eating meat somehow isn't a part of nature, as if suddenly, if humanity suddenly goes vegetarian, that suddenly all the carnivorous animals in the world will suddenly do the same. So anyways, after Luke completely refuses to, like, train Rey in the ways of the Force and basically, like, shows her the first Jedi temple and claims that the Jedi have to end, I came to this planet to die, he goes on to the Millennium Falcon, having realized that Han is now dead. He looks around all the old familiar places. He finds a set of dice that are hanging from the Millennium Falcon's, windshield. A set of dice that weren't there in any of the previous movies, but you totally know that Disney is going to digitally add them in on the next special edition of the films that they release. And basically speaking, these dice are supposed to somehow be significant, except the fact that we as fans have never seen them before. And that's when Luke comes across R2-D2. And R2-D2 basically tries to convince Luke to give Rey a chance and train her to be a Jedi. You know, I just don't get it. Why the heck is everybody so gung-ho about Luke training Rey when the entire purpose of this mission was supposed to bring Luke back so that he could join the Resistance? Like, what? Like, why is it that people are suddenly wanting him to train Rey all of a sudden? Who is Rey? Nobody even knows that she's sensitive with the Force apart from Maz Kanata. So, anyways, in order to basically, like, emotionally blackmail Luke into going along with training Rey, R2 shows that recording of Princess Leia asking Obi-Wan Kenobi for help from the first movie, and it is, like Luke said, that's low. It's like you're trying to emotionally manipulate him in this situation. But here's what I don't get about this entire situation. Luke knows that Snoke and the First Order and Kylo Ren are a thing. That they are out there terrorizing the entire galaxy, and that his sister is literally leading the charge to fight against these people, where her life potentially is in danger, and she could get killed at any moment. And yet, Luke came all the way out here to ignore this entire problem and die, for no other reason than he feels sorry for himself. Why do you think that showing him a recorded message of Leia from 40 years ago is somehow going to guilt trip him into doing anything? As far as I'm concerned, Luke should literally be just as cold towards this recording as he has been to Leia literally the past however many years he's been on this island. So, consistency, what's that? Oh yeah, did I forget to mention that we have this incredibly long, drawn-out scene in which it shows Luke basically gathering up his sustenance for the day? Like, basically it shows him spearing a very large fish and carrying it back to his hut to eat. And, of course, the infamous green milk scene. I mean, you would expect that someone that's basically living on an island in a kind of rural fishing community would basically have to resort to this kind of thing, but why is it in the movie? Does it even need to remotely be significant? Also, if Luke came to this island to die, why is he choosing to sustain himself? So, basically speaking, the scene is just weird and cringy, and whoever thought that it was a good idea whoever basically, greenlit this idea should be slapped in the face. I mean, Ryan, what the hell were you thinking doing a scene like this? It's gross and uncomfortable, especially considering the way that the sea creature that he's milking this stuff from is sitting. It almost kind of looks like the udders are the thing's testicles. So, yeah. And the worst part about it is that after Luke fills up his bottle of this stuff, he just immediately drinks from it. He drinks it straight, completely unpasteurized or whatever, and he literally does this, that whole face, it's tangy but does the body good kind of look. It's ugh. It's one of the cringiest scenes ever put to film, so... Anyways, back to the narrative at hand. Luke has been successfully guilt-tripped into helping Rey, and he says that he's going to give her 3 lessons, not to become a Jedi, but to why the Jedi should end. Lesson number 1, he takes her out to this cliff and talks to her about what the Force is. And I find it so funny because Rey's view of the Force is basically a surface-level, stereotypical view of the Force. So now, it's this movie that has a superficial, stereotypical view of the entire franchise, trying to pretend that it actually has depth and it works with the canon of this entire and lore of this entire franchise, when literally it doesn't. This entire movie is an insult to the lore of this franchise. So... basically speaking, Luke explains that the Force is an energy field that is generated by all living things and whatnot, and he tries to get Rey to meditate and focus and reach out with the Force, at which point Rey does. She closes her eyes, and when he tells her to reach out, she literally reaches out. At which point, he gets annoyed by it. He picks up a blade of tall grass and, touches the tips of her fingers. And she's like, I feel something. You feel it? I feel something. It's the Force. And then he literally slaps her with the leaf. And it's like, this movie is tonally deaf. Effectively speaking, they tell too many jokes with this movie to actually take it seriously. This movie wants to pretend like it's the darkest of all the Star Wars movies, and yet the cringy amount of humor literally ruins it. You have this moment that basically is supposed to be serious. It's supposed to be the moment where Luke basically, begins training Rey, only to basically, start it off with a complete joke like that. Okay, so... I want to basically, take a moment to return to, that little ramble that I did, the personal issue with my father in regards to this movie. Like I said, his memory of The Last Jedi is so shoddy that I honestly cannot believe that he actually is completely okay with what this movie did. He's just not thinking about it, because he doesn't even remember what this movie did. I honestly think that at some point he thought we were talking about The Force Awakens, because he literally said, and I quote, we don't know why Luke was literally on that island. We don't know why he was there. I literally turned to him while I was driving and said, Dad, it's said several times throughout the movie, I came to this island to die. And then Dad just kept making up excuses after that. It's like, oh, he's doing what Yoda and Obi-Wan did. They ran away. They basically, hid themselves off. Dad, you know better than that. They were waiting for the opportunity. They were waiting for Luke to be ready to be trained. So... the simple fact that Dad basically, does not truly understand anything about this movie, it it really just kind of frustrates me because it's like that entire conversation was pointless. It was pointless when Dad literally told me, I'm just glad that these movies exist, because that basically like showed me that Dad had made up his mind and wasn't going to hear any argument that I had to make. So basically speaking, Dad assumed that Luke was basically going to do for Rey what Yoda did for him, but the movie goes out of its way to show that that's not the case. He tries to reluctantly go along with that, but he literally gives up after this one moment, because when Luke basically tells her to actually stretch out with her feelings and feel the Force and give him an indication of every single living creature on this island, Rey feels everything. She feels the animals on the island, the people on the island. She feels she feels the waves crashing against the island. And then she feels the cave at the bottom of the island that's strong with the dark side of the Force, because apparently every single planet in the entire universe has to have one of these things, right? So, basically, she gets so curious about the dark side of the Force that she goes straight towards it, and suddenly she has this, like, huge burst of power that Luke has to shout her name several times to bring her out of, and basically she falls off the rock and whatnot, and Luke is basically like, you went straight to the dark. You didn't even hesitate. I've only seen this kind of raw power once before. It didn't scare me then. It does now. And then he leaves her, basically cutting off the lesson and even somewhat kind of refusing to teach her the next few lessons. Oh yeah, and there's also this one line where basically she says, I couldn't sense you. You cut yourself off from the Force. And it's like, yeah, I mentioned that earlier, and it might as well be a throwaway line that only exists to explain why Luke didn't know that Han was dead and why he hadn't done anything about what's been going on in the galaxy right now, because, effectively speaking, the simple fact is, Luke being cut off from the Force is so easily undone later in the movie, it might as well not even be a plot point. You would think that being cut off from the Force is something detrimental, that could physically and mentally scar someone for life. Keep in mind when I unleash my rewrites of this entire trilogy. So anyways, so basically speaking, after Luke basically rebuffs Rey for her raw power, she goes down this slope and begins training with her stick or whatever, and then she decides, you know what, I'm going to start training with a lightsaber. And she ends up losing control and cuts the rock in half. Yeah, because that somehow justifies her not being a Mary Sue. Anyways, a lot of what happens on the island is all just one big, gigantic, confusing mess. I think that at some point we get to the next lesson, and this is actually one of the things that I thought was enjoyable about this movie, because it's one of the things that showcased that the writer was actually thinking about deeper ideas, and he actually had a good idea that he could have explored with this line of thinking, but he completely fumbled it up. The idea is that, basically speaking, Luke basically talks to her about how now that the Jedi have been extinct, they've been romanticized, and how they weren't exactly as good as as people believe them to be. That's true, but it's a little too simplified than that. It's true in the sense that the prequel trilogy was meant to show that the Jedi weren't exactly morally good 100%. They weren't exactly right. In a lot of ways, they basically were just as bad as the Sith. But the simple fact is that the Jedi did do a lot of good for the galaxy. The problem is, by the time of Yoda's Jedi Order and the fall of the Old Republic, the Jedi, just like most of the senators in the Republic, had fallen into complacency. They had fallen into a point where they basically did not They basically had they basically did not anticipate that the Sith could return because they were so overconfident in their own abilities. But let's not pretend like the Jedi never did anything bad, because the people on the dark side does worse. Like, the Jedi basically are misguided, and they do things wrong occasionally, but the Sith literally commit atrocities. The Sith literally capture and torture people. The Sith literally cause the economic collapses of planets so that they can come in and basically attain control of them. Let me just basically use an example from the Clone Wars. The Jedi Order, basically like centuries before the time of the Clone Wars, literally put an end to the Zygerian slave empire. The Jedi literally ended slavery in the galaxy, with the exception of the Outer Rim, because they didn't have jurisdiction in the Outer Rim. The Republic couldn't get jurisdiction in there because the Hutt Empire, the Hutt crime family, was too strong. So, basically speaking, the Jedi basically attempted to end slavery. So, basically speaking, slavery was brought back during the time of the Galactic Empire, and apparently the New Republic and Luke's Jedi Order didn't try to put an end to slavery, because apparently there are still children being sold into slavery. But on that same example, the Jedi put an end to the Zygerian slave trade, which is why centuries later, 1,000 years later actually, basically the Zygerians allied with the Separatists, particularly with Count Dooku, so that they could try to rebuild their slaving empire. The CIS literally lands on a planet that wants to remain neutral in the galaxy, filled with peaceful artisans that basically are pacifists. Count Dooku basically says that sometimes even the most peaceful colonies can get caught up in the war between the droids and the clones, and if they pledge their loyalty to the CIS, they can offer them a safe sanctuary where they basically won't be harmed. You know what that safe sanctuary ended up being? A slave colony run by the Zygerians, where these peaceful people who were literally just kidnapped off of their home planet were basically conditioned to be sold as slaves. Yeah, that's the dark side doing this. That's the dark side doing this versus the Jedi who put an end to all of this. So, yeah, movie. The Jedi messed up. The Jedi were misguided. The Jedi were wrong about a lot of the things that they did. The Jedi did not anticipate the return of the Sith, and they allowed Palpatine to rise to power. But the simple fact is, that doesn't mean that they were bad. That doesn't mean that they deserved to end. Like, Johnson wanted to basically, make the argument that the Force doesn't belong to the Jedi, in the fact that the light side of the Force will not extinguish if the Jedi are gone, except the people who fight for the light side of the Force, being the Jedi, will basically be gone. It's all a semantic argument. Basically speaking, the Jedi did good for the galaxy. You basically want to have this argument that they basically did no good and they were just as bad for the galaxy as everyone else. There's an argument to be made there, but it requires a lot more nuance than you are willing to put forward in this situation. So, okay, so this movie, as you'll see, tries to have it both ways. It tries to make the claim that morality is not black and white, but there's still a completely morally white good faction of the universe. We'll get to that in a minute. So, there's so many things that I want to say about this scene that shows that they could have done good, because part of Luke's Jedi Order was to address the failures and the inadequacies of the old Jedi Order and correct them. But this movie literally shied away from doing that. It's like, yes, Luke, the old Jedi Order made mistakes. You were supposed to fix them. But you didn't get the chance to because this movie robbed you of that legacy. Okay, so after that, literally nothing. After that, basically, like, Luke has a story where he explains how Kylo Ren fell to the dark side, where basically Luke sensed that, like, that Supreme Leader Snoke was reaching out to Kylo, and that basically he was being tempted by the dark side, so Luke went to check on him one night, at which point Kylo Ren ignited his lightsaber and attacked Luke, and basically used the Force to bring the structure down upon them, burying Luke in rubble. And when Luke emerged from the rubble, his Jedi temple was being burned down, and several of his students either left with Kylo Ren or they were killed. Makes you think that maybe the students that left with him were going to be the Knights of Ren, right? Right? The Knights of Ren aren't even a thing in this movie. It literally and that's basically the thing, like, the Knights of Ren were only mentioned in passing in the first movie, and I literally didn't think much of them. I didn't think that they were going to be cool or anything. I didn't think that they were actually going to be even a thing in these trilogies, and this movie just basically proved to me that I was right. They weren't going to be a thing, so basically speaking, that's what ended up breaking Luke. The fact that he couldn't prevent his nephew from falling to the dark side, as an evil dark side manipulator decided to manipulate Kylo Ren. And so, basically, Luke decided to go off to to the first Jedi temple in the entire galaxy to whine and pout and die. And so, one plot point that I've basically been skipping over is the fact that somewhere along the lines, I think after Rey fails her first test with Luke, her first lesson with Luke, basically, she basically somehow has a Force Skype conversation, a FaceTime, with Kylo Ren across the galaxy. Now, something like this has never been seen in Star Wars, but something similar to it has been seen. We know that people using the Force can reach out across the galaxy in order to kind of send messages to people on the other side of the galaxy, but never to this degree. The idea that they can literally see each other face to face, but Kylo Ren, for some reason, can't see the world around her, despite the fact that she can see the world around him. And he literally says, "You're not doing this. The Force would kill you. Wait, the effort would kill you." This Force connection between the two of them does have an explanation. This movie gives us an explanation for it, at which point The Rise of Skywalker completely retcons that explanation out of continuity, so don't get invested. He tries to use the Force on her to make her to discover where Luke actually is, but she breaks off the connection with him somehow, and yet somehow or another, it's revealed that, like, because it was raining where she was when he reached out for her, he was somehow able to feel the rain. That somehow or another, this connection between them isn't the Force making a mental bridge, it's making a physical bridge, in which case physical objects can actually pass between them. And that doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, how could that possibly be a thing? I'm sorry, but you're using the Force irresponsibly in this movie, Ryan. The Force has limits. It's not this all-powerful thing. I mean, don't get me wrong, the Force is powerful, but even it has its limits. But the people making these movies don't care about all of that because they're going to keep pushing their narrative and their agenda whether we think it makes sense or not. So, basically speaking, after her second lesson with Kylo Ren, after her second lesson with Luke, in which she basically learns that, like, basically, that Kylo turned to the dark side and tried to kill Luke and whatnot, she basically has another Force conversation with Kylo Ren, at which point he has his shirt off, and he's actually, well, quite muscular, and we're supposed to be feeling something in this scene or whatever. Or at least the female audience is supposed to be feeling something. Right now, basically, like all the guys that basically saw this movie, all they saw is meme material. Ben Swolo, everybody. It's just so awkward because it literally showcases what this movie is now going towards, and I legitimately cannot believe it. You are literally trying to force the main protagonist and the main antagonist of this trilogy to fall in love with each other? I'm sorry, but that just doesn't fit in Star Wars. Star Wars is basically about... You would think that basically Star Wars does have some semblance with relationships. It's the story about... It's a family drama in a lot of ways, but it's not about romantic love in that regard. Part of Anakin's story was his love for Padme and whatnot, but like George Lucas said, that was only ever just a means to an end. So basically, the idea that they're trying to pair up Kylo Ren with Rey, it comes off as some of the most cringiest stuff I've ever seen because it feels out of place because I know that Star Wars is better than this. Star Wars isn't supposed to be this... It isn't supposed to be ship material, you know? Like, basically you can look up artwork of the prequel trilogy, you'll probably find artwork of Obi-Wan and Anakin being shipped, but the thing about it is that the people who make that kind of artwork, they're just doing it for fun. They know that it's not really canon. Once you give them an actual canon ship, that's when the really obsessive people start coming out of the woodworks. And that's the kind of crowd that Star Wars never needed. That's the kind of crowd that basically like only gets excited when they have a quote-unquote cute couple that they can ship. And it's just like, you're appealing to the wrong crowd with these movies. You already have a built-in audience that you are literally going out of your way to insult and try to get rid of when it comes to these movies. And now you're trying to appeal to a group of people that had no interest in Star Wars whatsoever, and now you're trying too hard to bring them in. So the fact that they're trying to ship Kylo Ren with Rey suddenly means that Kylo is going to get a sympathetic backstory that completely justifies why he murdered his father, which Rey basically hated him for because she saw Han Solo as a father figure and now wants to see Luke Skywalker as a father figure as well. Remember how I said that this entire trilogy was about daddy issues? Well, Kylo Ren literally says that that's Rey's weakness, that she keeps searching for herself, the identity, the secret to her own identity and herself through familial connections. She keeps trying to find out who she is from her parents. She keeps trying to have a father figure in Han Solo, and now she wants to have a father figure in Luke Skywalker as well. But it's not going to work out for her. Okay, so now after she accuses him of trying to kill Luke and destroying his Jedi Order, Ben tells his version of the story. I never expected that we would get a Rashomon in friggin' Star Wars, because Star Wars doesn't really feel like a movie that requires flashbacks, you know what I'm saying? It just feels out of place, you know? So we basically get a flashback to Ben's version of the events, at which point he woke up, he looked over, and he saw Luke standing over him with a maddened look on his face and his lightsaber ignited, preparing to strike Kylo Ren down, preparing to strike Ben down in his sleep, at which point Ben ignites his own lightsaber and pulls the roof down on Luke purely for self-defense. And so now Rey doesn't know who to trust. She doesn't know to trust Kylo Ren, but she knows that she can't trust Luke either. So she decides to go to the dark side cave on the island, the nexus of the dark side, at which point this is honestly where this part of the movie is actually a bit of a mixed bag when it comes to my impression of it, because it could basically be like a 1-2 thing. It's like, it's got some things that I like, some things that I hate. Let's start out with the things that I hate. Basically speaking, earlier in the movie, it showed that Rey was in awe of the ocean and basically in awe of the rain trickling down on the island, because she, having spent her entire life in a fucking desert, an all-encompassing desert from which there was no escape, she's never experienced this amount of water before in her entire life. It's cool. It's neat. When Rey gets to the cave, she immediately dives in and jumps in and dives underwater, swimming perfectly. This person, who has grown up on a desert planet, who has never seen water to this amount in her lifetime, knows how to swim. Look, I'm basically one of the advocates that says that swimming is actually instinctual, that human beings actually do have a latent instinct that tells them how to swim, because human beings that don't know how to swim know surprisingly how to tread water pretty well, and even newborn infants know to basically know how to hold their breath if they ever fall underwater or something. So, but even still, it just comes off as another one of Rey being perfect for the sake of making her perfect. She can't have a flaw even if it makes sense. And it makes sense for her not to know how to swim because she grew up in a fucking desert. Okay, so she dives into the dark side cave. You remember how I said that the writer and director of this movie swore up and down that this movie wasn't just going to be The Empire Strikes Back again? He lied. I'm gonna save that for, like, the end when I'm done talking about the major plot points of this movie, because it's so friggin' blatantly obvious. So, basically, Rey rips off the scene from Empire Strikes Back in this scenario, because she goes into a cave that is strong with the dark side of the Force. Now, the thing about it is that it's actually very forgivable, because this is actually what a Jedi has to do. This is actually one of the Jedi trials. It is known as the Trial of Spirit, also known as the Mirror Trial, and it's probably one of the most dangerous and rigorous trials that any Jedi can face during their training. Why? Because the Jedi is now forced to face their strongest and most ultimate opponent, the darkness within themselves. They must go to a place in the Force where the Force reveals the darkness within themselves, at which point they have to confront it. That's basically That's basically what happened with Luke on Dagobah. And we know that basically that's what happened with Luke on Dagobah because the same thing happened with Anakin Skywalker on a different planet during the Clone Wars. And the thing about it is that so many people misinterpret that scene from Empire Strikes Back, but I'll save that for another video. As I said, this trial is called the Mirror Trial because it is meant to it's meant to show the Jedi who they really are underneath, exposing the darkness within themselves. And yet, apparently, apparently Ryan Johnson does not know that that's how it's supposed to go. That basically there's supposed to be nuance to it, because he basically takes a look at like the lore of the franchise and says that this trial is all about facing the great mirror. And what does he have Rey do? He literally has Rey face a mirror. Not just a mirror, an endless series of mirrors, in which Rey is shown to be exactly the way she is. Ha. That means either one of two things. It means that, one, Rey is either 100% pure darkness to the point where she shows up in the mirror exactly as she is, or she has absolutely no darkness within her whatsoever. And judging by the agenda that's being pushed by Disney Lucasfilm, which do you think they're actually going to go with? If you said any other choice but the latter, you deserve to be slapped. So effectively speaking, because Rey is apparently so pure and has no darkness in her whatsoever, the dark side cave can't manifest a vision for her to face, because she basically carries no fear, no ambition, no greed with her into the dark side cave, no anger either. No anger, fear, aggression, greed, no obsession. The only thing that she wants to know is who her parents are. So she literally asks the mirror, asks the Force to show her who her parents are, and yet she literally showcases nothing. Now, I said that there were things about this scene that I liked. This was the scene where, honestly, I was at the most panicked. I was literally sitting in the theater going, no, 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 especially when the silhouettes of her two parents came up. Why? Because, like I said, I didn't want Rey to be the child of Luke or Han or Leia. I didn't want her to be related to their lineage. I wanted her to be someone new. I wanted her to be someone important, yes. I wanted her to have her own family lineage, her own backstory. I wanted her to be a Kenobi. So, because that would have been cool. It would have been a cool way to not only keep it fresh, but tie everything together. So, at the prospect of this movie revealing who her parents were, and me knowing that Disney is stupid enough to make Han Solo and Princess Leia into her parents, retroactively making them the worst parents in the entire galaxy, I was really afraid. So, I breathed a sigh of relief when the scene ended without them revealing who her parents were. Whew. I have to take a breath. So afterwards, you remember how I mentioned that how the plot point with Luke basically cutting himself off from the Force is so easily undone, it might as well not be a plot point? It literally shows him reestablishing his connection with the Force just so that he can basically check in on Leia. But because Leia is in a coma at this point in the movie, he can't connect with her. So now, he's going to pretend like he's suddenly worried. Cutting off your connection to the Force literally should be a moment where should literally be a life-crippling thing. Don't get me wrong, I feel like it's possible to where someone who is strong enough with the Force could eventually regain their connection to the Force, but the idea that you can just turn the Force on and off like a light switch, it's just too easy in my mind. So keep that in mind as I basically talk about that when it comes to my rewrite of Episode 8. It's not going to be called The Last Jedi, I guarantee you that. Episode 8, working title. Okay, so Rey decides that since she couldn't get answers to who she is from the Force, she decides to FaceTime with Kylo yet again. She talks about how much she sympathizes with him and yada 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 and whatnot, and maybe basically they could actually put an end to this war by working together. They reach out towards each other, at which point Luke senses it. He breaks in on their Skype chat and literally disrupts it by using the Force to destroy the hut that Rey is currently in. And so, yeah, cool. Luke is connected to the Force again, at which point Rey is apparently so angry with him that she attacks him. He defends himself by basically breaking off an antenna from like a nearby shop and basically uses it to hold off her attacks with her staff. And I'm just left thinking, where's your lightsaber? Where is your lightsaber, Luke? Literally speaking, this entire saga wanted to build up the importance of Anakin Skywalker's lightsaber, but the next movie is literally going to showcase something different. So, it literally goes to show that someone over at Lucasfilm must hate Luke Skywalker and just completely wants to disrespect him, because Luke doesn't have his green lightsaber at all in this movie. We only see it via a flashback. So basically, Luke manages to fend her off like using the hit when they're fighting with staffs and whatnot, and he even uses the Force to get the advantage over her, at which point she pulls out her lightsaber and she manages to overpower him, defeating him. Now I'm just left wondering, Rey has grown up her entire life using a staff as her primary means of defense. Why is she better at using a lightsaber than she is at using her staff? If anything, she should have beaten Luke using her staff. But most importantly, she just beat Luke fucking Skywalker. How the hell does that happen? She shouldn't have been able to beat him, especially now that he's reconnected with the Force. Like I said earlier on, Luke Skywalker in Legends is apparently such a master with his lightsaber, people are confused into believing that he is using 10 lightsabers at once. So, now that Rey is holding him at lightsaber point, she basically demands a confession of what really happened. And so, we get the moment that literally assassinated Luke Skywalker's character in this movie. As it turns out, what really happened is that Luke had sensed that Snoke was reaching out to Kylo Ren, beginning to manipulate him and tempting him towards the dark side of the Force. So Luke went into Ben's hut that night and used the Force to basically get a sense of what Kylo Ren was thinking of or dreaming of at the time. And he sensed something so dark and so heinous that Ben Solo wanted to do, that he thought that it was a good idea for the sake of the galaxy to ignite his lightsaber and kill Kylo Ren in his sleep. Now, I'm just going to basically wrap up this scene as quickly as possible so I can actually talk about why this scene doesn't work. Luke, after he ignites his lightsaber, he has a moment of hesitation where he realizes that, no, this isn't right, I shouldn't do this. But at that point, Ben has woken up and is looking at his uncle standing over him in the dark with his lightsaber ignited, and he goes for his own lightsaber to attack out of self-defense, and then basically the scene happens as it's basically happened the last 3 times. Roof collapses, and the Jedi Academy gets burned down. So, let me get this straight. Luke Skywalker, who knew his father was Darth Vader, who knew that Darth Vader spent literally the last 20 years causing all kinds of pain and misery as the militaristic face of the empire, who literally basically caused so much pain and misery, even personal pain and misery to himself. Like, before Luke realized that Vader was his father, Vader was the man who killed his father. And not only that, because Vader is basically the face of the Empire's military, Vader might as well be responsible for the deaths of Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru, the people who raised him. So, that's him killing his familial family, as well as his biological family. And not only that, he's the guy that killed Obi-Wan Kenobi, his mentor figure, his surrogate father. So yeah, Luke knows that Vader has done some pretty unforgivable things, and yet, despite the literal genocide that Vader had actually committed in his life, Luke sensed that there was still goodness in him, that there was still something worth redeeming. He literally was willing to bet his life on it. He bet his life on the hunch that Vader could be brought back to the good side. He was even willing to die to prove that it was possible. So keeping that in mind, with Luke turning out to have been right about Darth Vader to the point where there was still good in this horrible evil man, he finds out that a dark side user is tempting his nephew to the dark side, and he finds out that his nephew wants to turn to the dark side. So I just cannot help but wonder, what the fuck was Ben imagining doing that could possibly have made him worse and far more irredeemable than Darth fucking Vader? What could Luke have possibly seen that would have justified even remotely considering the idea of killing his nephew in his sleep? That's what a Sith does, Luke. I'm sorry, but that's not the point of Luke's journey. Luke learned better than that. He learned understanding, of patience, of compassion, things that the Jedi espoused but didn't actually have. So, anyways, here is how the Luke Skywalker that we all know and the Luke Skywalker we all deserved would have handled this situation. He would have handled it patiently. Because sometimes the best way to handle a situation is to handle it completely neutrally, by doing nothing, to let the events unfold until you are ready to act. Luke should have been patiently meditating, contemplating the fact that Snoke is reaching out to Ben Solo, at which point Ben should have come to him and say, "I'm leaving your Jedi Order, and I'm going to join with Snoke. I'm going to turn to the dark side, and I'm going to destroy everything that you represent." Luke should have been like, "Fine, go. I believe you." And Kylo should have been awestruck by that. And Ben should have basically been like, "You don't care? How could you not care?" And basically, so Luke could be like, "Don't misunderstand, Ben. I care a great deal. And it's the reason why I care about you that I'm letting you go. I'm letting you make this decision. You have to walk your own path. I cannot decide what your path is going to be for you. You have to make your own decisions. You have to make your own mistakes. But just know this. Just because I'm letting you go now doesn't mean that I'm abandoning you. You're going to join with Supreme Leader Snoke, and one day you are going to realize that you have made a great mistake. And I will be there for you. I was willing to risk the safety of the rebellion and my own life on the hunch that my own father, the grandfather that you admire most, Darth Vader, could be redeemed, that he could be brought back to the light side, and I was correct. And so now, I know, no one is incapable of being brought back. If you turn to the dark side, I will find you. I will redeem you. I will save you. Feel free to leave. I won't stop you. And that's when Ben should have ignited his lightsaber and tried to kill Luke, only for Luke to completely handle him like a chump. Just completely disarm him and literally toss him out of the building. I shouldn't have said that. I should have saved it for my rewrite of the friggin' prequel of the fucking Last Jedi. So, anyway, that is how Luke should have been. He should have been someone who was tempered by his previous experiences, someone who is wiser, someone who knows better than they did before. I mean, the fact that my father can't understand basic character arcs, it's almost like my father is a very religious man. It's almost like he would look at the Bible, look at the story of David versus Goliath, and be completely alright with the fact that David, as the young boy who slayed the giant, the young boy who was humble, who refused to marry the king's daughter, who refused to become the king's son-in-law, who refused to even become king on many occasions, it's like he's perfectly alright with believing that that same boy would later go on to become a self-centered hedonist who would later go on to have an affair with a married woman and have that woman's husband killed so that he could marry her in his place. It's like my dad doesn't understand that characters are meant to develop, that characters are changed, that the David you see in one story is not the same David that you see in the next one. It's almost like going from Jurassic Park to The Lost World. Ian Malcolm in Jurassic Park was arrogant, he was sarcastic, he was playful, and he made the biggest mistake out of anyone in Jurassic Park because he knew that Jurassic Park was going to fail, and he literally predicted how it was going to fail. And yet, instead of telling Jurassic Park management exactly how and when it was going to happen, and what they needed to do to shore up defenses to make sure it didn't happen, he thought that it was better to insult the Jurassic Park management and let the events play out the way that they did, and he suffered the consequences for that. He suffered from a broken leg that likely turned septic, 24 hours of pain, and in the novel, he died because of it. Well, sort of. He was basically fell into a coma from which they thought he was going to die, but he came out of it, so he paid the price for it, and because of his experiences in Jurassic Park, in the sequel, both the Lost World novel and the Lost World movie, his attitude and his resolve has been tempered. He is now much more serious. He is much less likely to take things as frivolously as he did before his experiences in Jurassic Park. Because when you get picked up by a Tyrannosaurus Rex, you're going to basically remember that experience for the rest of your life. You have a broken leg because of your experiences in Jurassic Park, so you're going to be slightly bittered, and you're going to be a lot more serious-minded than you were in the past. You aren't going to take things frivolously, you're going to take action further. How does my dad not understand that? Okay, so worst of all, how do so many people who like this movie don't understand that? Okay, so Rey gives Luke one last chance to redeem himself and insists that he come with her to try and redeem Kylo Ren. And I gotta admit, he should have gone with her. The movie should have had him coming with her to try and face Supreme Leader Snoke alongside her, revealing that he still has his green lightsaber in an attempt to try and redeem Kylo Ren, because that would have been a great way to end this movie. But nope, you gotta disrespect Luke Skywalker as a person as much as possible. Luke literally refuses, saying that this isn't going to go the way you expect it to. She then leaves. She goes on the Falcon with Chewie, and she basically goes to confront Kylo Ren. At which point, Luke lights up some kind of gas torch, and he runs toward the Jedi Temple, saying that he's going to put an end to this and burn the temple down, at which point, the movie literally does the most egregious thing that it can. It brings in Yoda. It brings in Yoda as a Force ghost who confronts Luke and even begins taunting him when Luke tries to go burn down the first Jedi temple, and when Luke refuses to do so, the movie literally does the one thing that shows that it doesn't understand Force ghosts, and it doesn't understand the Jedi, and it doesn't understand Yoda's own character and philosophy. Yoda uses the Force to create a lightning bolt that strikes the temple, burning it to the ground, despite the fact that this island has been covered in rain for the past few days, and all that wood should basically be soaked with water, so it shouldn't necessarily burn. And then Yoda laughs about this. He's like, "Missed you, I have, Skywalker." Then Yoda basically gives the most egregious pep talk to Luke in the entire franchise, basically saying that, like, you destroyed the Jedi Temple, you destroyed the Jedi knowledge. Destroyed the Jedi text, have I? Read them, did you? Page turners, they were not. So they're trying to imply that Luke didn't read the actual Jedi text, the ancient Jedi wisdom that he found on that island, despite the fact that the sequel movie literally goes to show that one of the books in that collection was actually Luke's. So anyways, basically speaking, like, the worst part about it is that Yoda tries to justify that there was nothing in that temple or those texts that the girl Rey did not already possess. Yeah, and people wonder why so many people believe that she's a Mary Sue. But we'll get to that. And then Yoda tells Luke a story tells Luke a proverb about failure is the greatest teacher. The greatest teacher failure is. And that, basically speaking, like, he needs to learn as much from Rey as Rey needs to learn as much from him. Except Rey didn't learn anything from him, and it seems like Luke is the only one that's learning anything. Now, here is where I get fucking pissed off. Because it's at this point in the movie where anybody who defends this movie literally has their argument backwards. They literally see this movie in a way that is contradictory to reality. Because a lot of people are saying that Luke Skywalker being disrespected in this movie doesn't matter because it's not Luke Skywalker's story. It's Rey's story and Kylo Ren's story. To that I say, if this is Rey's story, why does Luke have the character arc? Why is it that Luke is the character that has to undergo a change in this story? Why does Luke have the actual character arc in this movie instead of Rey? Why does Luke actually undergo change? Why does Luke the one who has to learn the lesson? Because you see, this movie starts out with Luke refusing the hero's call. Check. It starts out with Luke being set in his old ways, in what screenwriters referred to as the lie the character believes. The lie that Luke believes is that his failure is representative of the Jedi's legacy of failure, and because the Jedi have failed in the past, they deserve to be extinct. It's time for the Jedi to end. That's the lie that he believes. And so, this moment is meant to showcase Luke learning the truth of the situation. That because the Jedi fail actually makes them stronger. It makes them better. Failure makes anybody stronger, because from failure you learn. From success, not so much. You learn from your failures because it teaches you what not to do in the future. So yeah, Luke is the one who has to change. Luke is the one who learns something in this movie. So If this movie isn't about Luke, why is he the one undergoing the character arc? And if you're trying to say that Rey is the one who actually has the character arc in this movie, that Rey espouses the greatest teacher failure is, how come Rey doesn't fail at anything in this movie? Literally speaking, Rey experiences no failure. She's literally so powerful with the Force that she doesn't fail at anything. She's literally so pure in the light side of the Force that she doesn't even fail the mirror test. The whole idea of the mirror trial is that a Jedi is supposed to fail it. You're supposed to fail because you're supposed to confront the darkness within yourself in order to learn a perspective about who you are. It's like the Kobayashi Maru. It's a no-win situation. Everybody has darkness within them. You're supposed to fail. A lot of people say that Rey fails because she doesn't redeem Kylo Ren. We'll get to that. Now, a lot of people are saying that failure is the theme of this entire movie because Poe failed by apparently rescuing the fleet, by destroying the dreadnought and saving all those people, so he failed by doing the right thing. Finn and Rose Tico failed because they basically they actually orchestrated a plan in order to basically get the First Order off of everybody's tail so that everybody could escape properly, only to be found out because they put their trust in the wrong person. So yeah, they failed. Holdo failed because her plan was fucking stupid, even though the movie doesn't want us to believe that Holdo failed because the movie wants us to believe that Holdo was right the entire time. Princess Leia and Han Solo failed because apparently they were terrible parents and letting their child fall to the dark side but that's not what we're supposed to believe. We're just supposed to believe that Han Solo was a deadbeat dad who sold his medal that he earned in the original Star Wars movie for drinking money because God forbid that a father actually be a decent human being for once. That we actually have a father figure for our main character who is actually a good father. Nope. He's supposed to fail. Princess Leia isn't supposed to fail because a mother automatically wins. A mother is automatically not to blame regardless of whatever happens to her child, even though statistics show that it's actually the mother who is screwing up the child more than the father does. Okay, so Luke failed because he basically let his fear control him to make an impulsive decision that Luke Skywalker would never actually make because Luke Skywalker isn't the type of person to kill someone in a vulnerable position, especially a blood relative, and we have seen evidence of that in the fucking movies before this moment, but and Luke Skywalker also failed by hanging out on this planet for the last 20 years or for the last 10 years or so, feeling sorry for himself, claiming, "Oh, I want to die," but not doing anything about it. I don't even know why Luke reneges on burning down the Jedi Temple, when apparently burning down the Jedi Temple is effectively meaningless, according to Yoda. Oh yeah, I forgot to rant about Yoda. I immediately went into that whole failure is the best teacher. We'll get back to that, but I feel like I can talk about Yoda because it's less powerful this way. Yoda. I'm going to put it out there that Yoda being the Force Ghost to come and give Luke a pep talk was a mistake. Now, don't get me wrong, they probably did it because Frank Oz is still around, and a puppet doesn't exactly age, but even still, there's something wrong with the Yoda puppet. It doesn't look right. They said that they used the same molds that the original movies used, but there's something about this version of Yoda that doesn't look right. Like his cheeks are puffed out like a chipmunk, and his eyes are too narrow. Yoda's eyes could basically be expressive in the original trilogy, but they didn't necessarily do what this Yoda's eyes did. There's just something about this Yoda that looks off. Like, basically speaking, like, I think that it's because they went too far with the CGI on Yoda. They gave him, instead of letting the puppet do the actual emoting and expressing, they had CGI do expressive motions for the puppet. It's like with the Jurassic World movies. I love the Jurassic World movies, especially when they use the puppets in the movies, but some of the special effects that they do for the puppets, they use CGI over the puppets, and that just ruins the point of having the puppets. So it's like, show us the puppets, not the CGI. Okay, so, like I said, it wasn't basically a good idea to use Yoda for this scene, because even though Yoda and Luke spent a lot of time together, their relationship wasn't nearly as strong as it would be to where Yoda would appear to Luke in this scene giving him the pep talk, or at least not alone. Somebody else should have shown up in this scene to give Luke the pep talk that he needed to. Someone that Luke knew, respected, and felt had a much better relationship with. Someone who, had they shown up to talk to Luke, probably would have meant more than Yoda. I'm talking about Obi-Wan. Hell, I'm technically even kind of talking about Anakin in a lot of ways. The fact is that they should have brought Ewan McGregor back to play Obi-Wan. They should have basically given him a white beard and made him look as much like Alec Guinness as possible, so that basically it could be a nod to both the prequel trilogy and the original trilogy. Or better yet, you could basically have Obi-Wan as a Force ghost do what Anakin did. Basically become the Force ghost of the younger self, because who wants to spend eternity as an old man, am I right? Basically speaking, to showcase, himself as a younger man, played by Ewan McGregor. That would have been great. It would have been so excellent to have Obi-Wan in this scene. And hell, it would have been better to have had Hayden Christensen come back as Anakin in order to give Luke a pep talk. Granted, it would have been weird because Hayden Christensen as Anakin's Force Ghost is a lot younger than Luke is currently, so it would be kind of weird seeing a much younger man giving, advice to a much older Luke, but it would have worked a whole lot better than Yoda, because Luke has a better relationship with Obi-Wan than he does with Yoda. And Anakin being there, Anakin is his father. He should have been there with him the entire time. That's the whole point of these Force ghosts. The idea that these characters aren't gone. They can continue to help people in the physical realm. And the idea that Luke's been cut off from the Force for this entire time shows that they haven't been able to help him. But what about before? Obi-Wan should have been there when Luke was making the decision to kill Kylo in his sleep. And it's they should have stopped him from doing that. They should have said, Luke, don't give in to your fear. Don't give in to hate. But they were nowhere to be found. And it just goes to show that these people have no idea what they are doing when it comes to making these fucking movies! So, and here's basically the one thing. When you're a Force ghost, your essence merges with the Force, but you get to keep your personified form. You are nothing more than basically the Force giving a projection of your body as you were in life, your consciousness. Effectively speaking, you can't physically do anything. It's debatable on whether or not you can even use the Force, because you are the Force in this situation. The Force is more or less using you in this sense. It's creating a projection of you. So the idea that Yoda can use the Force to literally create a bolt of lightning, literally using a forbidden Force technique that only the Sith use. Yoda fucking used Force lightning. Do you guys not comprehend that? Yoda used a Sith technique, the Force lightning, and he used it to destroy a building. This goes to show the huge disparity of the people who don't understand the lore being allowed to make these movies, because Yoda would never do something like that. Yoda's philosophy and the philosophy of the Jedi is a Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack. Now, all of you who are saying, what about all in the prequels when the Jedi are using the Force all the time against their opponents? They're using the Force to push back battle droids. That is a form of using the Force defensively. But using the Force as a weapon, as in pulling things off of the objects off the wall to throw at your opponents, that's using the Force offensively. Using the Force to strangle your opponents, that's using the Force as a weapon to attack someone. Using the Force to generate an electrical current between yourself and your target, that is using the Force as a weapon. Jedi don't do that. I find it funny because shortly after the release of The Last Jedi, I actually found a meme online in which two screenshots of Yoda from the original trilogy and Yoda from The Last Jedi. Yoda from the original trilogy has the caption saying, "Jedi uses the Force for knowledge and defense, never for attack." Over on The Last Jedi, literally using the exact same alphabet letters from the message over there, they configure the message to say, "Use the Force to attack Jedi knowledge, I do." Use the Force to attack Jedi knowledge, I do. Because that perfectly showcases the disparity in the personalities between Yoda then and Yoda now. How is it that they screwed up Luke Skywalker to this degree, but how did they manage to screw up Yoda to this degree? So, like I was saying before, the whole message of this entire movie, that failure is somehow the greatest teacher, I believe that because failure teaches you, like, what your mistakes are to not make the same mistakes again. However, you want to know, the people who think that this movie is a masterpiece think that this message is somehow so profound, that it's somehow groundbreaking in the Star Wars franchise, because Star Wars has never done anything like this before. Never had a message this deep. You want to know what movie out there exists that showcases that failure is the greatest teacher, that doesn't need to hammer the message over its audience's head or flat out explain to them in a line of dialogue that failure is the greatest teacher? It's a little known movie. It's a little known movie that you might have heard of. It's called Star Wars Episode 5: The Empire Strikes Back. I don't know if you noticed it or not, and I don't know if any of the people who said that Luke needed to fail because it was to showcase that he wasn't perfect in this movie, I wonder if those people ever considered the fact that in that movie, failure is literally the main running theme. It's the darkest moment in the trilogy because it showcases that the characters keep finding themselves in situations that they can't escape from. They keep failing to escape from them. They keep messing up. They keep failing. And Luke is the biggest failure of all in that movie. One moment, please. The simple fact is that the beginning of the movie, Luke fails to use the Force to sense a dangerous predator sneaking up on him and his Tauntaun. Luke, after disarming the Wampa, chooses not to kill the beast and take shelter inside of its cave, and instead runs headfirst out into a blizzard where he nearly dies. Fail. Han Solo has joined the rebellion for the last 3 years and never once decided to go back and pay off Jabba the Hutt his debt. Fail. Han Solo trying to basically get the Millennium Falcon out of there, only for the Falcon to completely crap out on them. Fail. The rebels trying to defend Echo Base from the Imperial walkers, only to be picked off one by one, even to the point where Luke gets shot down and crashes. Fail. Princess Leia deciding to stay behind instead of going to her transport to escape with the rest of the Rebel Alliance until it's too late for her to make it to the transport. Fail. Han Solo believing that it would be easy to evacuate Princess Leia out on the Millennium Falcon and get away from the Empire because he depends on the hyperdrive, which at present point is very faulty. Fail. Han Solo trying to get away from the Empire by going into the asteroid field. It works as a temporary solution, but it's clear that the Falcon will get battered the longer they stay out there. Fail. Han landing the Falcon on a large asteroid in order to make repairs for what could be several days, unknowingly landing the ship inside the belly of a large asteroid slug. Fail. Han once again trying to escape the Empire using the hyperdrive, which he surely must have fixed by now. Fail. The worst part about it is, every single time that Han succeeds in this movie, it always comes with a caveat. It always comes with a bit of a negative twist thrown in. He succeeds only to fail later on, because he actually does have a good success by basically attaching the Falcon to the back of the Star Destroyer Avengers bridge where nobody can see them or detect them. But unfortunately, what he didn't anticipate was that an old enemy of his who knows him so well would anticipate that he would pull off a maneuver like that. Then he basically believed that his friend Lando Calrissian would give them sanctuary, put them up, and help them repair the Falcon. Fail. And that's a huge failure because Han's entire mission is to keep Princess Leia safe from the Empire. And yet he practically hand delivers her into the Empire's grasp. And now Han pays the consequences for all his failures by being frozen in carbonite. Now let's talk about Luke. Luke flies to the Dagobah system. Instead of being able to land his X-Wing successfully, he ends up crashing into the swamp. Fail. Despite the fact that Luke can sense massive life readings coming from the planet around him, he can't sense the fact that the little green elf he's talking to is actually Master Yoda. Fail. Because of Luke's impatience, he shows to Yoda that he's not ready to be trained. Fail. Luke takes the spirit trial. He faces his own dark side in the dark side mirror. Fail. Like I said, you're supposed to fail that, but I don't know, like the whole Jedi thing is a bit sketchy to begin with. Luke does not believe in himself that he has adequate power enough with the Force to lift the X-Wing fighter out of the swamp. Fail. You see, I tried to explain that scene to my dad. The reason that Luke failed to do that is because he doesn't believe in himself. I can't believe it. That is why you fail. Then Luke succumbs to his own fear. He has a vision of Han and Leia being put in pain, being tortured, specifically because Vader knows that Luke will experience this right then and be drawn towards him into a trap. He succumbs to his fear of losing his friends, so he shakes off the rest of his training, flies out to Bespin, and tries to rescue them, despite the fact knowing that he's not ready to face Vader. So, not only does Luke fail in rescuing his friends in this situation, he ends up being the one who needs to be rescued. How do you not realize that Luke Skywalker failed all the time in these movies? He wasn't the perfect hero that you claim we believe he is. We endured ourselves to Luke because of his failings. That's why we don't believe in Rey as a character, because she never fails at anything. She's literally perfection given flesh, so therefore she is made of nothing. The worst part about it is, Luke fails so badly in this situation that the only way he gets out of it, the only way he gets away from Vader, is by committing suicide. Luke let himself go not knowing that he would survive the fall, not knowing that he would fall into a garbage chute and manage to save himself by hanging onto an antenna, and definitely not knowing that Leia and the others had escaped at this point to where they could come and rescue him in the Falcon. He didn't know any of this. He just had to have faith. He literally let himself drop, believing that he would die, but when he survived by falling into the tunnel, he began calling out to Leia to help him. And yet, Ben Kenobi in this scene did nothing to help him because a Force ghost can't interact with the physical plane. They can only communicate with the living. So yeah, the entirety of that movie is all about these characters' failure. Literally speaking, when you think about it, in the first movie, the only thing that Luke actually does right is blow up the Death Star. That's the only victory that Luke actually gets in the entire movie. Throughout the rest of the movie, he's getting his ass kicked or getting rescued by people. Sure, we have that one dramatic scene where he basically, swings across the narrow bridge carrying Princess Leia, but that's not really much of an accomplishment, is it? Okay, so the people... That is what pisses me off so much. A bunch of normies coming in and claiming that the Star Wars fanbase is sexist and racist for not liking this movie, which has such great ideas that they're too stubborn to recognize, when they're the ones who are treating Star Wars in the most superficial way. I guarantee that these people who are making these arguments haven't even seen the original trilogy, and if they have, they certainly never put any critical thought to them. They're not examining the themes and the characters of these original movies. They're only ever seeing Star Wars as the superficial, geeky toy commercial that people believe that it is. And that's why I friggin' hate these movies and the people who make them, and the people who defend them, because they are the ones who are taking a superficial view of Star Wars, not recognizing the greatness that Star Wars always had. The simple fact is, if you wanted these movies to appeal to a general audience, the writing should have taken care of that. Make something that's so good that appeals to the fans that the normal people, the general audience, they will come in and recognize what is all the hubbub about. They will recognize the greatness for what these movies are. Therefore, the fans will be satisfied, the general audience will be satisfied, and you will win twice over, Disney. But you didn't do that. You instead decided to appeal to a very niche demographic of toxic progressives who basically don't realize that they are the minority when it comes to their toxic opinions. They basically think that the world should adhere to their way of thinking when no one else in the real world actually supports them. So instead, you appealed to these, literally the worst type of demographic to begin with, and you ended up losing not just the main fan base that was loyal to you, but the general audience as well. Because this movie suffered severe financial drops in compared to its predecessors. The Force Awakens appealed to the general audience and even fans of the original trilogy, those that weren't thinking critically about it. But this movie? Nah. You guys were under a microscope for this one. I'm almost out of water. So, we need to wrap this up. Basically speaking, Rey comes in, she flies in on the Millennium Falcon, She has an ejector, she has an escape pod eject out of it, and Chewie flies the Falcon out of there using hyperspace. Let me ask, if it's so easy for a new ship to just come in out of hyperspace and immediately take off like that, what's to stop the Falcon from jumping onto the ship completely unnoticed, carrying like a whole bunch of maybe 20, maybe 30 people and ferrying them off the ship with various hyperdrive jumps? I'm pretty sure that you could actually get away with doing that, especially since the First Order is so incompetent, they're not paying attention to ships coming in or leaving the area. So, Rey flies her escape pod onto the Supremacy, before it's been destroyed by Holdo, I might add, and she expects to turn Ben Solo to the light side of the Force, at which point he arrests her. He handcuffs her, and he delivers her to Supreme Leader Snoke, telling her he knows who her parents are, and that she should turn to the dark side. Now, basically speaking, at the end of the last movie, I mean, I didn't pay all that much attention to Snoke because he was just a discount Palpatine in my mind. He basically said that once he was made aware of Rey's existence, he demanded that Kylo Ren bring Rey to him so that he could do something. My mind is that he would turn her to the dark side just as much as Kylo Ren did, and that Kylo Ren needs to complete his training. Apparently, Kylo Ren doesn't get any sort of completion of his training in this movie out of basically killing Rey, because Snoke basically demands that Rey be brought to him specifically so that he can kill her, so that Kylo Ren can kill her and complete his training. Yeah, because a girl he's only known for a few days is somehow going to... killing her is somehow going to adhere him more to the dark side than killing his own father and mother. Okay, so Snoke basically talks about how, you remember the Force connection between the two of them that allowed them to see each other across the galaxy? As it turns out, Snoke was the one who was doing that. He created the connection between them. Keep that in mind because it's going to be retconned later. Snoke believed that, apparently, the way that the Force works in the galaxy nowadays is that every time there is a strong darkness, there must be a strong light that rises to counterbalance it. Bullshit, because that's not how this franchise worked at all. That's not what balance in the Force actually means. It's all fucking bullshit made by people who don't understand this franchise to begin with. So... Basically, Snoke reveals that the reason that Rey is so powerful is apparently because she is the light side of the Force, rising up to challenge the dark side that is Kylo Ren, and also Snoke. And so basically, like, Snoke reveals at this point that the First Order has discovered the rebel ships trying to flee from the main cruiser and trying to escape down to Crate, and now they're blowing them up, and now he forces Rey to watch them being blown up, just like how Emperor Palpatine did to Luke in Return of the Jedi. And Rey tries to use the Force to take Anakin's lightsaber and kill Snoke, only for Snoke to reveal that his Force powers are stronger. He grabs the lightsaber out of the air, flings it around, clunks her over the head with it, and basically just showcases what a scrub she is compared to him. So yeah, she's the most powerful Force wielder ever, except for this bad guy, who's apparently the most powerful Force wielder ever. So, Force wielder. Okay, so basically speaking, after torturing the information of where Luke Skywalker is in the galaxy, not like it's going to matter in a few minutes, Snoke decides that Rey's outlived her usefulness and starts to kill her. Wait, or that he commands Kylo Ren to kill her. And apparently Snoke is so omniscient with the Force that he can basically see anything. He could read Kylo Ren's mind, but he can apparently only read vague thoughts and actions to the point where Kylo Ren begins subtly manipulating Snoke by basically turning the lightsaber on his true enemy, and he ends up turning Anakin's lightsaber, which is sitting on Snoke's throne, towards Snoke. He turns the lightsaber on, and he cuts Snoke in half. And I'm just left thinking, what? You killed off the main puppet master, the actual threat of this entire friggin' trilogy off in part 2? You cut him in half, and you do so in such a stupid and telegraphed way that it's just so laughable that this actually got written. Somebody was actually paid to write and direct this, people. All for the sake of subverting our expectations. I'm getting so tired of talking about this, and I'm nowhere near being done. This is honestly one of the moments where I realized that I should have written a script for this, but I wanted this to just be a rant. I wanted this to be rambly. I wanted this to basically be my unscripted, unfiltered feelings about how much I hate this movie and how badly this movie fails as a concept, not just as a Star Wars movie, but as a movie in and of itself, to be completely unfiltered. I'm just so tired of it at this point. Because the point doesn't need to be made anymore. This movie is terrible. It's so fucking terrible, and yet there are still people out there who defend it. There's some scrub out there that literally released a guide to liking this movie within the last few days, despite the fact that 2 years later, literally speaking, the backlash against this movie has been so great that Disney went out of their way to ignore most of what this movie did, as much as what they could get away with. We won. You guys lost. This movie was such bad garbage that the studio that made it literally had to ignore it in order to create a cohesive narrative to end out the trilogy. And even still, what this movie did crippled the next movie so badly that the narrative wasn't cohesive enough to save the trilogy. So, Supreme Leader Snoke is killed, and Kylo Ren has now joined with Rey to the point where the Praetor guards that are designed to basically protect Supreme Leader Snoke are now going to start attacking Rey and Kylo in literally the most over-choreographed, the most clunky and slow, the worst lightsaber battle of the entire franchise. Like, so many people complain about, like, The Dark Knight Rises, how in one scene on the rooftop with Catwoman, the bad guys are literally just standing off to the side, waiting for their cue to get in and be punched by Batman and whatnot, to the point where literally Batman swings a fist at one of the bad guys and he just falls over without any connection being made. Yeah, that's this battle in a nutshell. Basically, basically 3 guards attack Rey all at once. She holds all 3 of them off, she kicks one of them, and all 3 of them fall over. Rey gets subdued by one guy who's supposed to have 2 knives, but ends up losing one of those knives in a completely inexplicable scene, because if he had both knives, there's no excuse as to why he shouldn't have killed her. And then, of course, Ben having to be rescued by Rey and these guys. They're not using the Force to basically, like, keep these guys back or keep them to a distance. Nope. Only using the Force to throw lightsabers to each other and basically, like, kill each other straight out. So it's around this point that the Holdo maneuver happens, and the ship gets broken apart, and Hi. And so everybody is distracting, and Kyle and Ray basically believes that Ben Solo has come back to the light side of the Force, and so they're allied now, and they need to get off the ship as quickly as possible. They need to go down to Crate. They need to save the Resistance from being destroyed. At which point Kylo says, "No, we don't. This is our chance to start something new, to start a new regime, a new faction." One in which possibly both the light and the dark side of the Force rule. That could be an interesting idea. So he tries to get Rey to join him, at which point he says, "I know who your parents are." This was basically the part where I was most afraid, but it was actually the part of the movie that I semi-enjoyed, because Kylo Ren reveals that Rey's parents were nobody. They were drunks. That they were junker drunks who literally sold her for drinking money. Now, this is both good and bad. I didn't want her to be a Skywalker or a Solo, so I didn't want her to basically be a part of this lineage. But finding out that her parents were nobody still rubbed me the wrong way. Because, I mean, it's like, that still doesn't explain why she's so powerful with the Force. Because, ultimately speaking, that still doesn't explain anything. Like having her be no one's daughter, you can't necessarily get away with that. I wanted her parents to be someone new, someone to be introduced into this galaxy that would have significant consequences on the lore. I wanted something new, but I didn't want nothing. That's basically the main problem of this movie when it comes to Rian Johnson, what he did with Snoke, and what he did with Rey's parentage. Literally speaking, Rian Johnson came out and said, "Your Snoke theory sucks. Your theory about who Rey's parents suck. You are just mad that you got that your expectations were not met, that I subverted your expectations." No, Ryan, that's not it. What we're mad about in this situation is the fact that we got invested in a story that you were telling, that you were responsible for completing this story in order to basically keep us interested in what was going on in this narrative, and you literally laughed at us for being invested in this movie. It's at this point where I basically have to admit that other people who have basically ranted about this movie, they've done a much better job than I have, and it's basically like Mahler said, they laughed at us for getting invested. Like, haha, it turns out everything that you were invested in when it came to this movie turned out to be nothing, haha. And so, Rey refuses to join Kylo Ren. Kylo Ren refuses to return to the light side of the Force. Basically, Rey tries to take Anakin's lightsaber back for herself. Kylo tries to take it back from her using the Force, and the Force between them is literally so powerful that it rips Anakin's lightsaber in half. Something that you would think would be an important plot point for the third movie going into this franchise, but no. It isn't. So, Rey escapes from the First Order ship by taking Snoke's personal ship or whatever, and meets up with Chewie later on in the Millennium Falcon. I have to explain this to you because the movie doesn't show it. All we get is General Hux appearing in the throne room, where he sees Supreme Leader Snoke dead and Kylo Ren unconscious, and he briefly considers killing Kylo Ren while he's unconscious so that he can basically maintain power over the First Order, only for Kylo Ren to wake up at the last minute and claim, "The Supreme Leader is dead, I'm now in command of everything." He force chokes out General Hux, and Hux is like, "All hail the Supreme Leader." And so basically, like, that's Hux submitting to, like, Kylo Ren's authority as the Supreme Leader. So Kylo Ren is now the main antagonist, the Supreme Leader of the First Order, in a way that he just completely does not deserve, I might add. And so he basically orders that a complete assault on Crate be carried out, and that there should be no prisoners, no survivors. It's at this point where I should literally just stop talking about the movie, because the movie's already had its third act, but it still keeps going. It has another third act. And I'm sorry, but when you get to a point where your third act has to be split into 2 parts, you failed. You failed at making a cohesive narrative, because now your narrative is bloated. It's lopsided. The movie should be over at this point, but it isn't. And that's why I hate to do this, but I have to basically stop the recording here. This is literally taking such a physical toll on me that I honestly cannot finish off this entire thing in the next 20 minutes. I need to take a breather, and I need to basically calm down, need to get myself some food and drink, and think about what I'm going to say for part 3 of The Last Straw. Because this movie is so bad, I can't do it in 2 parts. Sorry. I'll see you guys next time when we finally finish this. Oh my god.